My name is Gloria Chisholm, and I'm with the South Carolina Department of Education, Office of Early Learning and Literacy. This module has been created as guidance and support for districts and schools as our state implements the SCMTSS framework. The title of this webinar is Building Capacity and an Infrastructure of Implementation of the South Carolina MTSS Framework. This webinar may be viewed in its entirety or segmented into parts. One natural stopping point has been identified in this presentation. There are 3 learning targets for this module. During this module, participants will understand the role of building capacity and an infrastructure for implementation in the SCMTSS system. Participants will utilize the self-assessment of MTSS implementation, SAM, to determine strengths and possibilities for growth in building capacity and an infrastructure. Participants will use what they learn from the SAM to create an action plan to implement or refine the SCMTSS framework in schools to improve instruction for all students. There are 2 essential questions which will guide our work within this webinar. The first, what are the essential components in building capacity and creating an infrastructure when implementing an MTSS system? The second, how do we build capacity and an infrastructure within our school? There are some materials you may need during this webinar. You might like an electronic or hard copy of the South Carolina Multi-Tiered System of Support SCMTSS Framework and Guidance Document. You will also need a hard copy of Domain 2, Building the Capacity Infrastructure for Implementation, Domain Items 6 through 16 from the SAM. Additionally, you might like a traditional or electronic notebook to take notes, reflect, and capture your thinking. Let's begin with an immersion. The profile of the South Carolina graduate is the vision that all students will graduate ready for college, careers, and citizenship. This vision will be accomplished through a multi-tiered system of support for all students. The SCDE districts and schools will work together to implement the SCMTSS framework to utilize the most effective teaching and learning strategies that address the academic, behavioral, and social-emotional needs of every child. The SCMTSS is the framework for continuous improvement that will help achieve this vision. Let's take a look at what South Carolina's definition, vision, and mission for MTSS is. Take a moment to read over the slide. Think about how this definition, vision, and mission align with your thinking about MTSS. What similarities do you notice? What differences do you notice? And what are you wondering about at this point? Pause the webinar in order to do so. There are 6 components of SCMTSS. Building capacity and creating the infrastructure for implementation means thinking about how to implement all 6 areas with fidelity. To do that, let's take a look at the definition for this SCMTSS component on the next slide. Read the definition of building the capacity infrastructure for implementation on the slide. Underline or jot down key words, phrases, and points regarding building the capacity and infrastructure for implementation. If you are working with a team, turn and talk to share your thinking. If you are working as an individual, save your thinking to share with your team later. Again, you may pause the webinar in order to do so. Building capacity and an infrastructure is key to the successful implementation of MTSS. This means we are building the mental and physical capabilities of each member of the implementation team, as well as everyone in the school and district. Building capacity greatly contributes to sustainability. If something is sustainable, That means that the school will be able to continue to utilize MTSS as a continuous improvement framework even when the implementation team is gone, leadership changes, or faculty and staff changes. One important factor in building capacity and sustainability is the creation of an infrastructure. And infrastructure includes the formation of teams as mentioned in the module on leadership. A brief review is provided on the next slide. This slide provides a brief overview of the teams that support implementation of MTSS. There are typically 3 to 4 types of teams, including district leadership teams, school and building leadership teams, grade level or department teams, or individual problem-solving teams. Refer to the leadership module for definitions and further information regarding these items. Creating an infrastructure that promotes sustainability also means having a structure in place for ongoing professional learning and job-embedded coaching. Professional learning and coaching should emphasize the 3 main components listed on this slide. Please take a moment to pause the webinar and think about where your school or district is in regard to the implementation of teams, learning and coaching around database problem solving within a multi-tiered instructional system, intensity, scheduling, and database problem solving in Tier 1. Turn and talk with your team or save your thoughts to share with your team later. Use your current thinking to frame your investigation as you continue to work within the module. Let's take some time to investigate this even further. Because it will take time to implement the SC MTSS system with fidelity, it is important to take a look at the stages of implementation. It can take 2 to 4 years for full implementation to occur with fidelity. Read the stages of implementation graphic in the following 5 slides. Stop and jot down or underline key ideas, phrases, or words that you feel are important to discuss with your team. Also, pause the webinar at any point that you need to in order to complete this work. We will begin with key ideas about exploration, here you see a couple of key ideas about installation, and there are several steps in the installation stage. Implementation is divided into 2 parts, initial implementation and full implementation. If you are working with a team, turn and talk to share your thinking. If you're working as an individual, save your thinking to share with your team later. The key idea with implementation is that fidelity matters. Why would you implement MTSS without monitoring implementation and expecting to get results when your implementation might be missing the mark? Take a moment to pause the webinar and reflect on the stages of implementation. Think about what stages of implementation is your school currently in? What needs does your school have in moving forward in implementation? And most importantly, how will you ensure fidelity? As previously stated, this webinar may be viewed in its entirety or segmented into parts. This is a natural stopping point if you would like to stop at this time. As previously stated, fidelity is key. One way of measuring the implementation of the SC MTSS system is to utilize the Self-Assessment of MTS Implementation, SAM. This tool is designed to help schools self-assess where they are in the implementation process, identify areas of growth, determine when growth has been made, and ensure fidelity. Take a moment to complete the engagement listed on the slide. The SAM is an instrument designed to measure school-level implementation of MTSS. The SAM also measures the fidelity with which several elements are implemented. There are several factors which influence implementation. These factors include professional development, administrative support, data systems, staff perceptions, necessary actions and activities. These are a few of the critical elements to consider when implementing with fidelity. Pause the webinar and take a few minutes to work individually and scan Domain 2, Building the Capacity Infrastructure for Implementation, items 6 through 16. Look for the key ideas from page 38. Think about how this tool can support the implementation of the SC MTSS system at your school. Take a moment to stop and jot. How has your thinking about capacity building and creating an infrastructure been confirmed, challenged, or extended after investigating the stages of implementation and the SAM? What questions do you have so far? Turn and talk with your team, or save your thoughts to share with your team later. Use your current thinking to frame your work as you continue to work within the module. Let's synthesize our learning to create an implementation plan for the school. The SAM has a domain for each component of the SC MTSS system. However, this can seem overwhelming during the initial stages of implementation. For this reason, it may be beneficial to thin slice the domains. Thin slicing refers to the ability to look at small pieces of information to quickly assess the reality. Thin slicing can be beneficial in implementation because it provides support in assessing what is, but can also prevent the team members from feeling bogged down by the process. Use the 7 steps to thin slicing process to assess where your school is in implementation of Domain 2. The steps are listed on this slide and the next. Please pause the webinar if needed to do so. Now it's time to take action with your learning by going public. You may do this in several ways. You may share your plan with others in your building to solicit feedback. Once you have feedback, make any necessary changes and enact your plan. You may also engage in additional professional learning opportunities. You may have discovered some areas for possibility for growth within Domain 2. Several possibilities are listed on this slide. You have completed the webinar on building capacity and infrastructure of implementation of the SCMTSS framework. Take a moment to reflect and wonder about your learning. Think about how has your thinking around capacity building and creating an infrastructure been confirmed, challenged, or extended as a result of this webinar. What questions do you still have about building the capacity of others and creating an infrastructure for implementation? How will you act on these questions to continue to learn about capacity and creating an infrastructure?